Okay, good morning. Let's get started. John, if you want to take roll.
Commissioner Kasher? Commissioner Kasher, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Wasserman? Here. Commissioner Nguyen?
Here.
Chair Remke?
Here. Okay, I'm just going to start by stating, if you have not heard, that Commissioner Eskovitz has resigned. He resigned last week, which was not a big surprise since he stayed about 8 months past his term. And we really appreciate all his work and the fact that he was willing to continue on. But obviously his commitments with his law practice became somewhat complicated with all the time he was committing here as well. So we thank him. And Aaron, you're going to read the resolution that we are going to be presenting to him?
Yeah, sure. Resolution of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. The California Fair Political Practices Commission, pursuant to its statutory responsibility for the impartial and effective administration, implementation, and enforcement of the Political Reform Act of 1974, and in order to effectuate its purpose, does hereby resolve that Sean Eskovitz is recognized and honored for his loyal and dedicated service to the Fair Political Practices Commission. Now let it be known to all that Sean Eskovitz was appointed by Governor Edmund G. Brown Jr. to serve as Commissioner of the Fair Political Practices Commission in February 2011 and diligently served in that capacity until September 2015. And Sean Eskovitz is a partner at Munger, Tolles & Olson, where he has successfully tried numerous civil and criminal cases to judges, juries, and arbitrators across the country. And as a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, he also represents companies and individuals in government investigations and prosecutions. And Sean Eskovitz has given his time, legal experience, and expertise, and served as the commission's vice chair, all to the benefit of the commission, its staff, and the great state of California. Therefore, be it resolved that the Fair Political Practices Commission, on behalf of its members, its staff, and the people of the state of California which they serve, extends to Sean Eskovitz its most sincere gratitude and appreciation for his loyal and selfless service and its best wishes for continued success. Adopted this 17th day of September 2015. And we will be getting Commissioner Kasher's signature on that and mailing it down to Commissioner Eskovitz in Los Angeles.
Okay, thank you. Did you have another announcement?
Yes, so, and we also have another announcement given about a long-term staff member. I think it's been kind of public for a while, but our division chief for our technical assistance division, Linda Cassidy, is going to be retiring this fall. She's actually not here right now. She's at a family wedding for this commission meeting, but next in October will be her last commission meeting. So we'll be doing a resolution for Linda as well. And
After about 25 years?
yeah, I think a little bit more. And so obviously that's an adjustment for all of us. And I think Linda's looking forward to her next phase in her life. But anyway, so we'll be doing a resolution for her next meeting.
Okay, thank you. And there, Commissioner Wasserman, you had an announcement as well?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to announce for those who are interested that the Federal Elections Commission is holding their regional conference in San Diego, October 20th to the 21st. The details are at the FEC website. In addition, there is going to be a public forum on campaign finance October 22nd at UCLA Law School, which I believe the federal election commissioners will be attending, and then some other folks that we've seen in a lot of our Professor Levinson from Loyola, who is also on the LA City Ethics.
And me. I'll be attending.
And thank you. And yes, our own chair. So you will have a lot of hopefully important discussion and interesting viewpoints and experience. That will be October 22nd at UCLA Law School from noon to 1:30 p.m. at the Law School building in room 1420. I'm not entirely sure how one RSVPs, but I know Professor Adam Winkler is the host, so I'm going to throw that in his direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any other comments? Commissioner Kasher?
Chair Remke, this is Commissioner Kasher here. I just wanted to apologize for not being there in person. Sorry to not be there with you all in Sacramento, but I did want to thank Jesse Minardi, the interim executive director here at the San Francisco Ethics Commission, for hosting me here today, and for to commission staff for helping arrange for these accommodations. It's nice of them to host me here. And then for the record, there are no members of the general public here with me today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Public comment. Is there any public comment for an item that's not on the agenda today? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move to item 2, which is approval of the August 2015 committee meeting minutes. Are there any comments or corrections from the commissioners? Is there a motion?
No.
Madam Chair, I think I submitted a couple of typographical corrections, which I think are reflected.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do we have a motion?
I would move approval of the minutes.
Second.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Nguyen,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes.
This motion passes.
Okay, we'll move to the consent calendar, items 3 through 53. And before we get started with questions on the consent, we'll remove any items. I'm going to remove item 7. I do have a financial conflict with the treasurer who is in that stipulation, as she was a source of income for me in February of this year as I sold my interest in the duplex to her, and so during that discussion. Any other items need to be removed? Okay. Are there any questions regarding the consent calendar from the commissioners?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to make a comment. Although this is sort of an excess disclosure because it really has no material impact. On 41 and 42, both of those filers are or were, I'm not actually in contact with one of them, elected officials that in my former life when I could be politically active, I had contributed to many years ago. And that isn't a disqualifying category for the decision, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. West on the remaining items on the consent calendar?
No.
Is there a motion?
I move approval of the consent calendar.
I would say,
Well, that's items 3 through 53 minus item 7. I just want to clarify.
3 through 49,
Oops, you're right. See?
with the absence of 7. Yeah.
I would second approval of 3 through 49, absent 7.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Nguyen.
Yes.
Yes.
This motion passes.
All right, I'm going to step out while you vote on. Discuss item 7.
Our vice chair has resigned. How shall we proceed?
He's the senior.
Oh boy. All right. Then perhaps we should hear from staff on 7.
Number 7 was done as a trio of bills or a trio of cases regarding robocalls, and we would ask for your approval.
Are there any questions from the commission? Is there any
No.
public comment on, thank you, Commissioner Kasher. Is there any public comment on this item? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
I move approval of item number 7.
Second.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Nguyen.
Yes.
This motion passes.
Okay, so we will move to the regulations, starting with item 50 and amendments to regulation 18422.
Good morning. Heather Rowan with the Legal Division. This is Regulation 18422 as well as the repeal of 18413. Last year, SB 27 created political activity transparency requirements for multi-purpose organizations. Section 84222 requires nonprofit groups and other multi-purpose organizations, including federal and out-of-state PACs, that make expenditures supporting or opposing candidates or measures in California to disclose the donors of the funds used for political purposes. Most of these organizations disclose their most recent contributors using a last in, first out method, and thereby identify to whom they will send major donor notices and nonprofit filer notices. Federal PACs, however, are exempt from using the LIFO method of accounting because they itemize their contributors on their federal forms. The exemption allows simplified reporting that would otherwise be duplicative. After receiving inquiries on the subject, staff proposes that this amendment clarifies that multi-purpose organizations that are federal PACs are subject to the major donor notices and multi-layer reporting provisions in Regulation 18422. Additionally, because SB 27 and its implementing regulations supersede Regulation 18413, staff proposes its repeal. After an IP meeting in August, during which staff received several helpful comments that led to the language before you today, staff has not received further commentary. We request your support in amending 18422 and repealing 18413.
Are there any questions or comments from the commissioners? No. And again, we're just focusing on the first reg. Any public comment on, yes, please.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Gavin Baker, and I'm the Open Government Program Manager for California Common Cause. Thanks for the opportunity to comment on this rulemaking. We support this rule. We see it as very consistent with SB 27, which we supported. There should be no dark money in California. Voters have a right to know who is trying to influence our elections, and this rule ratifies that principle. It clarifies that there is no loophole. If you spend money in California, you are subject to California's rules, and the people of California have decided that you need to behave in a transparent and accountable manner. Encourage adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Yes.
Hello, my name is Kevin Wolf. I'm the chair of the California Clean Money Action Fund, and we are here in support of this rule change. And basically, our message is if there is a loophole, it will be found and exploited. So we're glad you're closing the loophole. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on this regulation?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Kim Alexander with the California Voter Foundation. We're very pleased to work with the Fair Political Practices Commission on Senate Bill 27 and want to say for the record how happy we are with the agency's implementation of this very important change in campaign disclosure practices in California. It is certainly going to help voters in 2016 when we're going to face a lot of initiatives. So thank you so much. And we want to associate ourselves with the previous comments that were made by California Clean Money and California Common Cause. We are one of a number of organizations in California that fight for voters' rights to be informed when they make choices. This is a right that's been affirmed not just by this agency, but all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And we also appreciate your agency's efforts to protect the disclosure laws in California overall. We support the regulation and realize that while it does create additional burdens for the campaign treasurers and have read the Political Attorneys Association's comments in opposition, we realize that there are safeguards to make sure that those are not too onerous. So thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, you sounds like you went into the second regulation.
Oh,
as
I'm
well.
sorry. I got ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Thanks.
thank you, though.
We can come back to that one later. Then.
Okay. Good. Thanks. Okay. Any additional public comment? Is there a motion?
I move approval of item number 50.
Second.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes.
This motion passes.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, item 51, amendments to Regulation 18422.5. Brian?
Commission Counsel Brian Lau. Regulation 18422.5 was adopted in July of 2014 to implement a part of Senate Bill 27. I stress a commission-sponsored bill that requires primary form state ballot measure committees and state candidate independent expenditure committees that have raised $1 million or more to report their top 10 contributors and for the FPPC to repost these reports on its website. Regulation 18422.5 currently provides the procedure for submitting top 10 lists to the FPPC, and these lists have become a popular feature of the FPPC's website. Not yet implemented, the bill also permits the FPPC to require the expanded disclosure of the top 10 contributors to any contributing recipient committee identified in a required top 10 list. This amendment will implement the expanded disclosure requirements. As proposed, the regulation will require committees subject to top 10 reporting to also disclose the top 2 contributors of $50,000 or more to any state recipient committee on their top 10 list. The statutory concept is actually pretty straightforward. Where one committee receives a substantial amount of funds from a second recipient committee, the public has a strong interest in easily identifying not just the second intermediary committee, but also the most significant sources of funds to that committee as well. However, implementing this provision does present a challenge because the committee will need access to another committee's information in order to report the information. To address this issue, staff has made very significant concessions to ensure that the requirements remain straightforward and simple. First of all, while the statute authorizes the commission to require the disclosure of all 10 top contributors to any recipient committee, this proposal limits the additional disclosure to only the top 2 contributors of $50,000 or more. These limitations help to highlight only the most substantial and significant contributions while simplifying reporting for affected committees. Perhaps most significantly, the proposal clearly limits expanded disclosure to state recipient committees. This ensures that all information needed for the report is available through the CalAccess system. Committees will not be required to try to compel the contributing committee to provide this information to them. In proposing expanded disclosure, staff emphasizes that these requirements apply only to the largest and most sophisticated committees, and any difficulty in identifying the top contributors only highlights the need for the information to be compiled by professional treasurers so that it is easily accessible to the public. In response to the 5-hour estimate provided by the Political Attorneys Association, we agree that this is a reasonable estimate if all top 10 contributors are state recipient committees. And this is the worst case scenario. But we would also contend that 5 hours to committees of the type that bring in $1 million of contributions is not the burden it is made out to be. To put it in perspective, if you look at it in terms of the compliance cost versus the total contributions, we're talking only a very small fraction of a percent. Additionally, to account for the few hours necessary to compile the information, the proposal extends the time for filing a report within the 16 days prior to election from 24 hours to 2 business days. Finally, staff is presenting one additional modifications to the proposed amendment. If I can draw your attention to page 3, line 1.
So now you're talking about the regulation
Yeah,
as
the regulation
drafted.
itself,
So
as
page 3 of the
drafted.
reg.
It currently reads, top contributors are determined by aggregating contributions. We would like to add just the phrase, top contributors are determined at the time the report is filed. And this addresses just an issue that was brought to our attention of when the actual determination must be made. There's because you might not qualify to file the top 10 for a long period of time, we want to make sure that the contributions are determined when the top 10 is filed and not at the time that actual contribution was made, especially in cases where that could be well over a year. With this, staff proposes the adoption of the proposed language, and I can address any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brian. Do the commissioners have any questions at this time?
So I have a couple questions. Okay.
Please.
So, this letter from the California political attorneys came in rather late. I was actually driving up here and read it on my phone last night, which that's a lot of information to read on your phone. But in any event, so does this apply only to primary? It's not multi-purpose committees, right? It's only the primary,
Committees primarily.
The committees that
formed
had to
support-
report would only be primary formed ballot measure committees and independent expenditure committees
primarily formed to
are
support
the
or
ones that
oppose
require
ballot
to
measures.
file the
So
two.
it did seem like this letter was, I mean, a third of this letter was addressed to general purpose recipient committees.
Well, the part of it, I think the issue that Brian stressed in his presentation was that it's only state state recipient committees, and that was not, I think, understood.
It
in
would
this letter.
require flow-through disclosure of state recipient, any state recipient committee. So the certain committees that are subject to T10 reporting would be required to disclose additional disclosures to any state recipient committee identified in the top 10 report.
Well, anyway, so there was definitely a disconnect there. In the regulation itself, it says primarily formed for state ballot measures, but the letter talks about general purpose
Well,
recipient
Those are the
committees.
ones, the primarily formed committees for a measure or to make IEs on a candidate. They're the ones that have to file the top 10
Right.
list. And then on their list, they may have major donors,
Oh, I
wealthy
see.
individuals,
Okay.
corporations who are giving, or they may have a state general purpose committee. Or so the reg is asking, and the statute provides for asking, show us a little flavor of what that committee is by showing its
Mhm.
some of its donors, if it's got a
Okay.
generic name.
Okay, I understand that. The second question I had is having to do with Access, which, over the years has had a number of problems, and we're relying now, or, we're asking reporters to rely on information that they'd have to get fairly quickly from Access to update these reports in pretty short order. So do you feel confident that Access is in a position that it could, address?
I think for our purposes, because what we're expecting, what we're essentially requiring is to report as shown on CalAccess. So to the extent that something's not there on CalAccess, problem with CalAccess, we wouldn't have any expectation on the reporting committee outside of what was actually readily available to them.
And I think these are pretty straightforward forms that are provided on CalAccess. I think what is not provided by CalAccess, which is implied again in this letter, is the new power search would somehow enable this to be gathered information, but that's not accurate. Is that correct?
No, we do not believe the power search goes to, while it might be a little more user-friendly and looking up specific contributions and the receipt and making a contribution, it doesn't go through the flow through contributions from one committee to another committee that SB 27 was intended to target.
So the information's on CalAccess. There's, as the CPAA letter and our own testing of it shows, there's work in aggregating it, because there's kind of two different buckets of contributions reported on CalAccess. You have to add those together, but the basic information is all there.
And
Well, I mean, I do support absolutely transparency and really want disclosure, but I don't want to create, a system whereby well-intentioned people in the flurry of the last 2 weeks of the campaign are kind of sent off, in different directions, trying to aggregate a lot of information, that may not be accurate because of system problems. So that's a concern that I've got.
And I don't think that we have seen through our testing that this information that's being sought would fall into a system problem with CalAccess. The problem with CalAccess is that you have to go through this process of aggregating in order to get the information. And I think the focus behind the proposed regulation is who is in the best position to aggregate that information. And the proposal supports the idea that committees that are primarily formed to support or oppose these ballot measures or candidates that raise over $1 million are in the best position to do it. And as pointed out, that's because they have, and I quote, very highly trained political reporting specialists on staff to do this. And I just want to give a flavor of, again, the burden that we're placing on these committees. For example, in the last election, there were 6 ballot measures. First of all, only 8 primarily formed committees qualified to list their top 10. So 8 committees, we're talking about 8 committees. And just to give you a flavor of those committees, just running real quickly, they raised 12 million, 4 million, 55 million, 4 million, 56 million, 8 million, 16 million, and $2 million. Again, so who is in the best position to exercise this additional 30 minutes of burden to get the important information out to the public?
So I have a couple of questions. I have in front of me both the letters that I have received of comment, and they're very diametrically opposed viewpoints, which is helpful. Let me see if I can put them together and ask you a couple of questions. Okay. I'm going to start with the issue that both raise with respect to burden. The California Political Attorneys Association takes the position that what they call the 10-2 requirement imposes substantial burden on filers and that the staff underestimate the practical difficulty. Some of that discussion has already gone on. On the flip side of that, you have the California Clean Money Campaign, which has stated 2 is not enough, and the burden for 2 and the burden for 10 or 5 is equivalent. And then it still goes back to the question of whether or not that burden, is it equivalent, and is that burden more than what we really want to do? I guess it's tied into the second question that's presented by the California Political Attorneys Association as to whether this information is already provided and if technology is already providing a solution so we don't need another layer of forms.
Okay. As far as the burden of 10 by 2 versus 10 by 10, we would probably be in agree with Common Cause. There is the burden there is small. The burden difference is small, but it's still trying to balance the burden versus the public benefit. And is an additional top 10 where you potentially have another list of 100? How does that serve the public interest versus the disclosure of the top 2 that really highlights where that information is coming from? So it is a balance. And anytime you have 2 stakeholders and one wants a little bit more and one wants a little bit less, I think it speaks to the idea that we're kind of hitting a pretty sensitive balance there.
I just want to, on that note, I also want to note the amendment since the original draft went not from listing the top second tier 10, but 2 at 50,000 as opposed to 2 at 10,000. Again, I think, as Hyla pointed out too, trying to focus on really the flavor of that state recipient committee.
I think the 10 versus the 50 does represent a little bit, a little larger burden difference as far as the 2 reporting styles, because it is easier just to drop out the ones that didn't eat the 50, so you don't have to go through the math and figure out the total contributions for all those smaller committees all the way up the list that they're aggregating off of CalAccess. And then, can you remind me the second question?
Sure, and that had to do with technology, because so I go to the new features, etc. I run a committee or whatever, and then I see a number and I say, where do those people get their money? And I run them. I mean, how is this a better alternative?
I think the information is out there publicly, but it's what has been discussed, which is who's at a better position to spend that 30 minutes per recipient committee to aggregate the information, the public and the press, or the professional campaign treasurer for these large committees that are that bring in such significant amount of funds.
And the arguments run both ways. It's not a one click on the recipient committee and CalAccess rolls their top 10 donors. It doesn't exist. That's why, at the IP meeting, people were saying, well, the information's all out there. It's so easy. But at the same time, it's so hard to compile. It's going to take so much time because it isn't compiled for the voter. So the idea behind 84223 was to put some information that's usable, digested a little bit for the voters, and technology should and will be able to replace it. But we've been waiting for new CalAccess for a long time.
Right. I wanted to highlight the question because I think for so much of what we are dealing with and so much of the things I think this commission and the chair are trying to do, a lot of these things hopefully we'll be able to resolve with technology, and especially things like this, which really are sort of data aggregation, should be able to be automated. So
I agree.
Yeah. I absolutely know you do.
Someday. And I would just, again, talking about that burden, I want to if we step back and look at what we're talking about, if we were to ask every member of the public to do this every time they wanted to know about the state recipient committee, we could have thousands of people going through this same exercise versus asking the one very highly trained political reporting specialist to do it once.
I'm going to ask one more question, and that is something that would be beyond our capability of simply doing.
Well, again, if you look at the numbers, should the burden be placed on us? Well, first of all, the law as drafted, as adopted, places the burden on the committee. So could we absorb it at a significant cost, because we would have to do it again for every committee as opposed to asking one committee to do it for itself? And again, should we, with a budget of 10 million, take that on versus that's for our entire operations versus a committee of 55 million do it? I think the law anticipated as it was adopted that it's the committee's responsibility, and I think the regulation's consistent with that.
Right, and the statute is a sort of a may, but I want to hit all the little points and close them off.
I think it's fair. I think
because we should address them, and the response is a very valid response, and I expect to hear different viewpoints shortly.
Okay, Commissioner Kasher, I just don't want to exclude you in the discussion. Anything from you on this?
No, my only comment is, and at this point, I'm not convinced that the burden on the regulated community here outweighs the public interest in disclosure. There was a point that was made on page 5 of the comment letter that was received from the California Political Attorneys Association, and there's a reference to a case site. It's CRP versus FPPC. In that particular I guess position that they're advancing is that this top 2 disclosure is somehow misleading, and this was and I was looking for the case. I didn't see the case site in the letter, so I wasn't able to pull the opinion and take a look at it. But it seems to suggest that if this top 2 disclosure applies to a general purpose committee, then it could be somehow misleading, and I'm not sure if staff has a position in response to that, but that was one of the questions that I had, and maybe if there's going to be a comment from Mr. Mason, we could address it at that point. But that was the one question that I had.
Hyla, do you want to go ahead and address that concern?
Yeah, I could comment on the California Republican Party, California Democratic Party case. It's we think distinct from this statute. It involved. It's an important case, and we're well aware of it. Involved on advertisement disclosures. It's under the section of the Act, the ad disclaimer rules, that require that advertisements, if they're supporting or opposing a ballot measure, or if they're paid for by independent expenditures, they have to identify on the face of the ad the committee's 2 largest contributors of 50,000 or more. So it's on the TV commercial, it's on the mailer. And the political parties, when that provision was first passed, the parties challenged the on-ad disclaimer requirement, saying, what if we've got someone who just contributes to the Democratic or Republican or whatever party generally, but they may not support a particular candidate or measure that the party's making an IE on or supporting in this race. So they don't want to have their name on the mailer, or the TV ad in that case would be misleading. And the court agreed that these on-advertisement disclaimers shouldn't apply to political parties. And the commission extended this reasoning to other general purpose committees. But the disclosure authorized in this section 84223 is not appearing on a political advertisement. It's not political speech by a candidate or measure committee. It is a report disclosing top contributors to a government agency. So those on-advertisement disclaimer cases involve content-based restrictions on political speech. They're subject to strict scrutiny. It's a whole different analysis. Reports disclosing campaign contributors, on the other hand, they don't involve limitations on political speech, and the disclosure requirements are subject to rational basis. So they're just
That makes sense. And
distinct.
thank you for that explanation. Highly
Okay.
appreciate it.
And I would just add, I mean, it's the intention of the commission when we post this to clarify that this is the top 2 contributors to the state recipient committee, but there's no, I mean, somehow that's all we're saying. We're not saying that, in fact, they knew they gave to the ballot measure or the like.
Right.
Okay, any other comments or questions at this time from the commissioners? Okay, do we have any public comment on this regulation? Who wants to start? Does the Political Attorney Association, are they here and do they want to start? Okay, I guess they're not here. Is there any other public comment?
Good morning again, commissioners. As I said before, my name is Gavin Baker. I'm the Open Government Program Manager at California Common Cause. Thank you again for the opportunity to comment on this rulemaking. As I said before, we supported SB 27, which gives the commission the authority to do this rulemaking. We think that the top 10 lists are very informative, and to be complete, they should also include the funders of recipient committees as this rulemaking proposes. I received the analysis from the California Clean Money Campaign, which I understand that the commission has also received, and I find it to be a very troubling analysis. And the example that they cite here, limiting the disclosure to only the top 2 funders in their example, would show you the source of $14 million of funding, whereas the next 8 funders together represent the source of $22 million of funding. And so limiting the second tier of disclosure to only the top 2 funders rather than the top 10, as the commission had originally proposed, leaves a lot of information in the dark. So we would encourage the commission to go further than the top 2 donors so that voters can be effectively disclosed. And I also have to take this opportunity to note that the only reason why this rulemaking is relevant is because of the limitations of the CalAccess reporting disclosure system, as Chair Emke and Commissioner Wasserman previously mentioned. And ideally, it should be computers and not people who are doing this math. I, of course, understand that the commission is not the operator of CalAccess, but I feel that I have to take this opportunity again to say that if we had a better system, then it wouldn't be necessary for the filers or the commission or for anybody to be doing this math by hand and to call for a modern system for reporting and disclosure. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on this?
Hi again. If I have the right agenda item this time, apologies for that earlier. Thanks for the discussion today. It was really interesting. And again, for the hard work that everyone has been doing on these issues. It's definitely into the weeds, which is why the legislation directed the FPPC to develop the regulations for this and not put it in statute. I just want to clarify that, one of the specific limitations of CalAccess and the reason why disclosure advocates urged the FPPC to start creating these lists is because sometimes there could be 30 or more committees that are for or against a single proposition. And that is extremely difficult for voters to try to go through on CalAccess, even if it worked great, 30 different committees to identify top donors. So that's why having the FPPC do this homework and aggregating all the contributions of all the committees for or against a proposition is such a great benefit for voters. And I also would think that the Power Search tool that's been added to CalAccess will actually help the political attorneys meet this. And maybe when they did this analysis, I'm not sure if they took that tool into mind when they were considering how burdensome it would be to do this, but hopefully with the parameters that have been placed on this requirement, it wouldn't be so burdensome using the new Power Search tool. And I also would like to comment that, I believe campaigns should and do know who's funding the committees. Many people in this room have been involved in fundraising. And if there's someone that offers you a contribution and you can't clearly figure out who they are, you want to know, where's this money coming from? People don't take money blindly in this town or in politics in general. So I really doubt this idea that, that people don't know where the money is coming from. And if it's true that someone's really trying to hide the money, the proposed regulation anticipates that and says the campaigns must make a reasonable effort. We know plenty of examples where people try to hide money in proposition campaigns. And so I think that the commission has taken that into consideration in developing this regulation and come up with a thoughtful and balanced approach to shining a light on the money in proposition campaigns. So thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment on item 51?
Hi, again, my name is Kevin Wolf. I'm the chair of the California Clean Money Action Fund. Thank you, Common Cause and Kim, for commenting on this as well. The problem is that, as I said before, loopholes are exploited. And there's a loophole here in only putting the two top contributors and moving them forward. You have to go through and get the top 10 anyways if you're going to cumulatively add in all the information. And so if you're in charge of this committee that's involved with the ballot measure, you're going to have to do this. And then you, because you won't know who the top funders are if you don't go into the weeds and find out who's hiding deep in these different contributing campaign committees that contribute all the way up. So let's just have them do the work. It's not that much extra. It puts a big burden on us, the public, to try to go through and find that information. We do it at California Clean Money Campaign. It takes 15 to 20 minutes for us to go through and follow it and track it all the way down and then accumulate it up. And that should be done at the committee level. And if you really insist on 10 is too burdensome, well, 2 is too few. Cut the pie and make it 5, but don't make it 2. That's way too few. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Wynn.
Thank you very much. So, Brian, would you mind walking us through how how we went from 10 to 2? Just
Well, we used to, it was proposed at one point, and I think the idea was that the advertisement disclosure as 2 at 50,000, on-ad disclosures are two major contributors at $50,000 threshold. So it was a number for the sake of simplicity. We could, at least committees would be familiar with that as a requirement. So it dawns on them that at the 50,000 threshold, the 2 have to be disclosed. So I think that's where we moved to 2.
I don't think that's a bad place to start. I mean, ultimately, it would be nice to get, a more inclusive picture, but I don't think that's a bad starting point. Kim, could I just ask one more question? Maybe you'd comment on this too, but the exception that you created about, a committee would be, would not get in trouble with this expanded disclosure requirement so long as it makes a reasonable attempt. Right. So what does that look like?
I mean, I think that we move into the very next subdivision, which provides kind of the guidelines of what our minimum expectations are. Okay. And I think, that's the next subdivision of the regulation.
So if you follow the
Right, if you
proposed
follow the
aggregation
Right.
using the 2 forms, you'll have
Right.
made reasonable efforts.
Okay.
That was in response at the IP meeting to people expressing concerns,
Yeah.
like this is another thing that could be an enforcement action. And so we wanted to make clear that if they did these procedures,
If you'd like to comment on that too.
Can I just comment real quickly on the 2 though? Because I hear the concern. We definitely started with 10 at 10,000 as the statute allows us to. And I think the issue is kind of seeing what we get and where we go from this. Let's say in the worst or best case scenario, every committee that raised over $1 million had a state recipient committee. Then we would have 10 top 10 with 10 top 10 within each potentially. And at some point, do we lose the flavor of focusing in on what we're looking at if we have now 10 to 110 names as opposed to, let's say, 2, 10, can't do math fast enough, 30. So I think, again, and as Hyla said, it was trying to give the flavor of the state recipient committee without overwhelming people with another additional list of 10.
Yeah. Hi again, Kim Alexander, California Voter Foundation. I just wanted to add that that we did suggest this to top 2 to the committee, to the commission staff in discussions, because we felt that it would conform this disclosure provision with other provisions, as Brian said. Also, the committee ID, committee naming ID provisions, which is currently a burden on campaigns, and they have to identify in a committee name who the top 2 donors are. So we thought conforming this with that same kind of requirement would be like what they're already doing in a lot of these committees anyway. And also, in discussing this with the staff, we recognized that because this is online and not a TV commercial disclosure, the FPPC can and does link to those committees' reports on the Secretary of State website. And if somebody wants to donors are to that committee, I think generally, correct me if I'm wrong, Hyla, but the intention is that they will be able to go straight into Cal Access and further explore that committee and all of its donors.
With a couple more clicks.
With a couple more clicks, right. But the idea is to make the top two readily apparent. When you hover over the name, it would pop out. And then if you want to dig further, you lead people down that path, but you don't overwhelm the display with too many, as the commissioner said, too many lists. Thanks.
Okay, any additional public comment on this? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the regs as proposed.
I'll second.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes.
This motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so item 52 are the staff reports, and I think we're going to start with the legislative report and hear from our ledge coordinator.
Good morning, Suki Brar, Legislative Coordinator and Senior Commission Counsel. I just wanted to give an update. There have been some changes as of my last legislative report that was issued with the notice of the meeting. The legislature has adjourned for the year, and some bills have passed out of the legislature and now are waiting for action by the governor. Commission supported AB 594 did pass out of the legislature and is waiting for the governor to hopefully sign. SB 21, AB 10, AB 990, AB 1544, and SB 704 have also all passed out of the legislature and are waiting for action by the governor. AB 1200 actually failed to pass out of the Senate, and it was granted reconsideration, so it is now a 2-year bill. So we'll see what happens with that bill next year. And also, as you may have seen in the ledge report, there is a staff recommendation on AB 1544. The staff recommendation is to oppose this bill. And I want to talk a little bit about the current behested payment reporting rules, and that will help explain exactly what this bill is doing. So currently, a behested payment is defined as a payment made by a person or other outside entity at the request of a candidate, and that is made principally for legislative, governmental, or charitable purposes. These payments are not subject to campaign contribution limits and are not considered to be campaign contributions because they do not go directly to a candidate. However, such payments are required to at least be reported when they reach $5,000 because they have been solicited by a candidate and could carry influence. Commission Regulation 18215.3 provides a small exception to this behested payment reporting requirement. The regulation provides that a payment is not subject to the reporting requirements if a candidate makes a request for a payment from a local, state, or federal government agency, and that payment will be used in the regular course of official agency business of the candidate. In 2013, in the Harrison Advice Letter, the Legal Division applied this exception. The question presented in that letter was whether a member of the legislature would have a behested payment reporting requirement when he or she communicates with the local, state, or federal government agency to request a payment to be made to a local government agency within the legislator's district for official agency business within the district. For example, a contact by a legislator with a county agency asking for a payment to be made to a school district within that legislator's district. The Legal Division advised that these types of government-to-government payments fall under the exception to reporting because assisting local agencies within a legislator's district with obtaining funding is part of the regular course of legislative business. In the same letter, the Legal Division cautioned that not all behested payments requested by a candidate from a government agency would fall under this exception, particularly those that are made to private individuals or entities. Because in those cases, there would be a benefit to a specific identified person or entity rather than just the general public at large. Earlier this year, the Legal Division received another request for advice on this issue in the SHUCAT letter. This time, the question was whether a behested payment requested by an elected officer made by a government agency to a private nonprofit would be subject to the Act's behested payment reporting requirements. Citing the Harrison letter and its cautionary language, the Legal Division concluded that the exception would not extend to this type of payment and would have to be reported as a behested payment by the elected officer. If AB 1544 is signed into law, behested payments requested by elected officers that are made by governmental entities to anyone will not have to be reported as behested payments, in effect overturning this SHUCAT letter. Current rules do not prohibit these payments. All they require is that they be reported. Therefore, staff recommends that the Commission oppose this bill because staff believes that behested payments made by government agencies to private entities should be reported because the public has an interest in knowing about these types of payments and who is requesting them. Thank you.
I know that we have Assemblymember Cooley here, and I'm going to let him speak in just a minute, but before he steps up, do the commissioners have any questions for Suki on the analysis or her comments? Commissioner Wasserman?
I just want to say I really appreciate the analysis, and it answered my questions before I had them.
Okay, great.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, Assemblymember Cooley, I know you want to speak on this.
Well, good morning, commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I just thought I would take the opportunity to come and address the commissioner with respect to this matter. This bill grows out of a conversation looking at some of the recent advice letters of the commission. And as the chair knows, the bill was introduced in the middle of July. I was at pains to make sure it was in print over the course of the summer. And the day it was placed in print, I placed a call to the chair to make sure the FPPC knew it was out there. We actually put out a press release on the day of the introduction in the same way to make it known that this had been brought forward. I actually view this as a pretty narrowly tailored draft that addresses the issue. I think most people in public life consider it routine to approach their elected officials, city, county, state government. If they're advocating for government action on something, to reach out to their public official and ask their assistance. I think that one of the limitations of recent advice letters is that they fail to acknowledge the reality that in our system of government, much happens by way of collaboration. We take our oath of office not to our district singularly, but to the Constitution, to conduct our affairs in accordance with the Constitution. And the line in some of these recent advice letters that makes whether or not you are within or without the rule depend upon your advocacy for your own district, I actually don't think fits the reality of how things happen. Most regions of California, we have city governments, we have special districts, but we have our councils of government, COGs up and down the state. They are very often instrumental in efforts to reach out to other units of government on a region-wide basis. This is very commonly done here in the Sacramento region. Hundreds of people, which will include many elected officials, annually make a trek to DC to engage in advocacy on behalf of the entire region. And this may or may not involve funding that will actually return and inure specifically to your district, investment in your district. So there's what I see the bill doing is in the behest area. I understand the logic of disclosure. We disclose gifts, we disclose contributions, we disclose behests in those fact patterns where someone might be trying to curry favor with the elected official. That to me is the underlying rationale for this law, very sound. In that area, we recognize governmental, legislative, charitable payments generally. This bill does not deal with the charitable category at all. If a unit of government, if an appeal is made to a state, local, or federal agency to make funding available for some charitable outcome, this bill does not touch that. This bit deals with when an appeal is made to a public agency, state, local, or federal, as a part of their governmental legislative program to put out funding, that class of payment, narrowly tailored to their own work, does not trigger the behest reporting requirement. I also feel it meets the practical reality that very often agencies do not necessarily make funding decisions with any particular alacrity. So someone who has once made an appeal, it may be ages before funding, if it indeed is issued, comes forth. So the bill recognizes that in the behesting statute, certain types of payments are presumed to be for purposes unrelated to a candidate's candidacy. These include a payment made by a state, local, or federal governmental agency or by a nonprofit organization that is exempt from taxation under 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. This bill simply says a payment by a state, local, or federal agency, so it doesn't include that nonprofit category, a payment made by a state, local, or federal government agency made principally for legislative or governmental purposes is governed exclusively by this clause. So I would actually say the staff report is slightly overbroad in saying a payment to anyone would be exempt, because I believe the statute differentiates governmental legislative from the charitable purpose.
I think they were referring to, though, anyone for those purposes, meaning, because as we discussed, and as the advice now talks about the distinction from government to government, and we discussed that when you first introduced this bill, that is something that I think is consistent with your proposal and reasoning when you say you reach out to seek money for your district. Maybe it's a region, but again, money from government to government, and the commission has said that it does not fall under behested payments. I think the concern and what the staff recommendation is raising is when a public official solicits or requests that money be given to, in particular, I think I have the concern with a for-profit company. And I think the staff recommendation talks about how if this bill is adopted, we are going to lose disclosure on the solicitations of public officials to, I think the number is $15 million that we are now seeing where that money went, that we wouldn't. And again, I think for me, the issue is this is not asking any public official not to do what they think is right or is important. It's just that we know what they're doing. Because I would argue that there is an appearance or a possible issue of whether it's a conflict or influence when a public official uses their position to solicit a government to give money to a for-profit corporation. And that corporation doesn't even have to be in their district or their region or anywhere. I think, again, it's important disclosure is all that the current law allows for. Again, public officials can solicit this money. It's just they need to disclose it.
Yeah. Well, I think the stated rationale for the bill addressing that issue is in the bill's urgency clause, verbatim from the clause. It is a core principle of representative government that an elected official's duties include advocacy of government agencies in favor of expenditures that benefit constituents or public purposes generally. It is also well established that a governmental agency may not expend public funds for purposes unrelated to the business of that agency. To that end, government expenditures are subject to a myriad of laws designed to protect the public interest and promote transparency, including laws relating to open meetings, the appropriate use of public resources, conflicts of interest, and disbursement practices. So I would say I hear that issue. I still regard this as a narrowly tailored statute fitting very closely to the current behest state, local, federal governmental language. It acknowledges the fact that within our system of governmental institutions, we have systems of accountability for decision-making at the state, local, and federal level. Very often these entities, their charge is to solicit input. And so I would say this bill is intended to take an area where we are working within a broad existing governmental structure, and entities which are charged and in their own work are doing these sorts of things, and not viewing the addition of a behest report as necessary as an additive feature to the way our underlying system of government works. I think in practice, the emergence of this, the differentiating between what's in the district, what is not within the district, the reality of collaborative efforts to kind of get things done, which is typical, they tend to be broadly talked about when the collective effort to try to get something done. I think there are many, many avenues through which this sort of transparency and accountability is addressed. As I say, the bill, I view the appearance here as just trying to complete the work and how I pursued the bill, putting it in early, alerting you, putting out a press release, visiting with any and all comers on it. I think that this is a very narrow area, and I'm not sure if, how do you draw the line between the budget, the legislator who makes advocacy on the state budget for funding, or we approve business tax credits and people are paying for business tax credits from a state agency. I think this is a hard area in which to draw lines. And I actually think that the line drawing is less essential where we're dealing with our fundamental systems of government. So I definitely felt I support disclosure. I think we need to major on majors, but minor on minors. I view this as a fairly narrow area. Most people would be, I just feel it's a commonplace that a public official would engage in advocacy, and it is narrower than the broad statute. As I say, it does not address any sort of funding to a 501c3. So, but I thank you just for the opportunity to come in here and present. This is just in the form of information on your agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for coming today and explaining this to us. And I do think it is a difficult line drawing, because certainly legislators will approach government entities from time to time, on behalf of the districts they represent, whether it's, additional, funding for CAL FIRE or, whatever it is. But so I do agree with you that line drawing is difficult. But even just looking at these examples in the staff report, I don't see the harm in disclosing if you are in fact making an appeal for money that is going, from a governmental project into, something else. And in fact, some of these are going to, for-profit entities. So I support the staff recommendation. I don't know if you're going to call for a motion. But.
I just want to see if there are any other comments or questions from the commissioners.
Well, I really appreciate the Assembly member coming to us and the communication and all the efforts. And I think because of your experience as a legislator, you understand how different people can come from different directions and view from, implementation, have different sense of implementations or policy or weighing out. But I really appreciate the interest in this area and the work that you've done. I have my own particular concerns about disclosure, et cetera. And I think that overall, the thing that I think about is how compelling the interest is in the public in knowing what's going on with their dollars. And I'm going to contemplate what you've brought to us with your own coming here and saying some things. So I'm going to give myself a minute while we discuss, but I wanted to thank you for coming here.
Commissioner Kasher, anything from you?
Yeah, I also wanted to thank Assemblyman Cooley for attending the meeting and for the presentation. I also want to thank Suhi and staff for the presentation. This is an interesting issue. I'm looking at the 15 million in behested payments that are currently being reported, and I think that there is a genuine interest in for the public in knowing, having information about those payments. And so, I tend to err on the side of disclosure, and I think that that's important. I think that this bill makes sense in some regards, in that what we talked about from government to government payments, but it seems like there's that exception that already exists. But I really appreciate this discussion and in particular the appearance of Assemblyman Cooley here at the meeting.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on AB 1544? Is there a motion on the staff recommendation?
I move approval of the staff recommendation.
I second.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes.
This motion passes.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you again, Assemblymember Cooley, for coming. Were there any other questions regarding the ledger report from the commissioners? Okay.
No.
No.
We have the legal division report, which I would just like to highlight, as I think requested by Commissioner Wasserman, just kind of an overview of the many, many outreach and educational programs that the commission is busy doing all year, have been summarized both in the legal report and the TAD, Technical Assistance Division report. Legal, for example, has done over 7 presentations that have included over 1,000 participants so far up and down the state. TAD has had over 50 workshops and webinars, again, with roughly 1,000 participants, and that's just to date. And we still have more coming, and of course, next year will be an extremely busy year. So I do thank staff for their incredible work and effort on all of those programs, which I think is a real key part of what the commission does. Any other questions or comments? So the reports will be submitted, and unless there are any more questions from the commissioners, I would move to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Kasher,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes,
This motion passes.
thank you.
Thanks.